Hello, and welcome to the Blockchain.com podcast. My name is Nicholas Carey, the co-founder and vice chairman of Blockchain.com. Here at Blockchain.com, we hand select some of the most popular cryptocurrencies for you to buy, sell, swap, trade, and hold right within the world's most popular crypto wallet, the Blockchain.com wallet. So what makes each one of these assets we list so special? What problems do they solve? How many people are using them? And what does the roadmap look like for each project going forward? From founders to developers, we'll hear straight from the brains behind the protocols themselves to find out why the asset is worth paying attention to. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Lily Liu, president of the Solana Foundation, to discuss Solana, the high-performance blockchain that helps builders create scalable crypto apps, and Solana's native crypto token, SOL. Solana officially launched in 2020, and since then, SOL has appreciated over 16,000%, making it one of the most valuable cryptocurrencies in the ecosystem, with a market cap of over $12 billion. So without further ado, Lily, we've got a little tradition around here. How did you earn your first buck? When did you, as a young adult, sort of learn that money played an important role in the world?
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for having me. I earned my first buck when I was 11. I was in middle school and grew up in California. No surprise, I played the violin, played the piano. I was in the youth orchestra. And part of the fundraising for youth orchestras, because they go on tours every couple of years, and cost a couple $1,000s to go to Europe or whatever. So all the kids would do this fundraising thing where they would sell candy. And initially, they kind of gave you basically like their source of candy to sell, and it was an assortment of 3 bars, and I was selling to my classmates. And then my mom suggested to me, she's like, well, if you've got a customer base and they want Skittles, why don't you just buy Skittles from Costco, and then you can sell them to your customer base. They want a different assortment. I was like, you've got a good point there. I eventually left that youth orchestra, but I still had my customer base. So I basically was a candy salesperson competing with food service. And I basically loaded my backpack in the morning with candy, and people would mob me at snack time. And so, I learned about inventory management, security, custody.
These are all very relevant. I can see how this all came together. So from basically being a school ground hustler to getting into crypto, what was sort of that transition, and when did you sort of learn that you wanted to get involved in the crypto community full time?
Yeah, so I learned about Bitcoin in 2013 when I was still living in China. And I learned about Bitcoin through folks that I used to play poker with. And initially, probably like a lot of people, I thought it was a scam. It's probably that thing used for money laundering, sounds pretty sketchy. But then I read the white paper, and because I'm not an engineer, I read it and I thought, well, this is definitely not a scam. I don't entirely understand sort of the full implications of it. But as I went into it further, what really fascinated me about it was living in China, which is a very kind of centrally controlled government with all the pluses and minuses of that. This idea that you would have an economic system, an economic community governed by its participants rather than a central party was just such a novel idea, right? And even today, we're still sort of mining and understanding all of the very profound implications of that. Because really, what's at hand here is not just digital gold, right? Not just new tokens, although there's many of those. What it really proposes is different ways of creating economic communities and governing those communities.
Cool. All right. So what does the president of the Solana Foundation do?
So, Solana, it's an ecosystem. It's not any one entity. The Solana Foundation, like many of these projects, is the nonprofit arm charged with helping facilitate the technology and the growth of the open source protocol, and the technology and the ecosystem associated with that. So, the Solana Foundation, we're based here in Switzerland. I am here in Switzerland as well, which is a beautiful place. And so Solana got started in 2017. And essentially what happened was there was Bitcoin from the early days, and then there was Ethereum that got launched in 2015. And Ethereum introduced this idea that these decentralized systems could be used for supporting all sorts of applications on top of them, in the same way that in the early days there was a bunch of technology around transmitting data, quickly over the internet, and then we over time built all of these cool applications that use that, initially with messaging, instant messaging, if we're old enough to remember the AIM days, right? IM, and then email. And then the browser came along as a way of delivering all these application experiences to people. And from there, social media came along and all of these other things that we now are now part of our everyday lives. So essentially, there was this new form of infrastructure, meaning the internet, that could transmit information really quickly from point A to point B. You could access it through your browser, and then like all these new ways of interacting with people and doing things online came about, right? Which is really, really transformative. So the idea with decentralized infrastructures, it might sound really arcane sometimes, but it's essentially infrastructure for the internet, but decentralized, right? Meaning that it can be run by anyone more or less around the world with varying degrees of sophisticated or a little bit less sophisticated hardware, and whether it's Ethereum or Solana or many of the other tokens you might see, like I think Avalanche, another one, Polygon, so on and so forth. They're basically different ways of providing decentralized infrastructure that can underlie new applications built for blockchain, crypto, Web3, whatever you want to call it, world, right? And the reason why that's cool is because there are potentially new applications and better applications to do things that we're very familiar with. So, for example, payments can potentially work much better in a Web3 or kind of blockchain-based world. And really fundamentally, what one of the biggest things about it is that you can own your own money, you can own your own information, and once sort of the individual can really own their own property in a digital world, then there's all sorts of sort of new things that come about from that. So that's why this whole sort of batch of call it 2017, 2018 blockchains kind of came about, inspired by Ethereum. And then they all kind of took different approaches to being able to do things faster and cheaper, right? So Ethereum, we love Ethereum. We owe a lot to Ethereum as a community. But Ethereum is faster and cheaper than blockchain, but still not that fast and not that cheap. And these things really matter because Ethereum transactions cost anywhere between $2 and $20, depending on how many people are trying to use the network. And they take a couple of minutes to really confirm, right? So for the average person out there that's used to sending money on the internet, right? And doesn't really think about, if I send money on Zelle to Nick and he sends it back to me, what's actually happening on the back end. I just care that I sent it, it's going to get to him. And I know fairly instantaneously that it's working, right? So if that's the case, then really of all of the sort of different blockchains that were born in that 2017, 2018 era, there's a lot that's going on under the hood in order to enable this. But with Solana, instead of spending a few dollars at least and waiting a few minutes, I can basically, do a transaction with Nick in a fraction of a cent in a fraction of a second, which means that that kind of base level transaction experience feels like the regular internet. And so, this is important because, sometimes it sounds like, oh, Lily, that's it. So it's fast and cheap. You're like, well, but fast and cheap is kind of, the beachhead for everything, actually. Right? If you think back to dial-up modems, again, that's something that I remember. But with 56K modems, a company like Netflix is
Impossible.
mailing DVDs back and forth. With Ethernet and with really fast internet, a company like Netflix is allowing you to stream video, right? So same industry, same company, wildly different applications and experiences.
Cool. Okay, so basically what we're saying is the internet sort of evolved to make it possible to send digital information from point A to point B. And then it got much more exciting where people were publishing information, consuming content. But there was sort of an infrastructure problem where you have these huge platforms that basically controlled people's custody of their information and how they were able to consume it. And so now we have this world of decentralized infrastructure that makes it possible to build new applications that let users more firmly control what information they share with what entities on the internet. It allows them to potentially perform faster, better, cheaper payments, and also basically control what type of experiences they have on all kinds of new applications. And so Solana is one of the kind of core platforms that is working to build up the infrastructure to make it possible for developers around the world to create these new experiences. All right, I think I'm getting it. So one of the things I'd like to learn a little bit about is how is the kind of economic design of Solana, for example, different from Bitcoin or Ethereum? So these networks basically settle and clear transactions. They have a native token. Bitcoin has a famous cap of 21 million. Ethereum's designed in a different way. How is the economic design of Solana competitive, and how does it compare to maybe Bitcoin or Ethereum that people are familiar with?
Yeah, sure. So the underlying mechanism that verifies transactions on Bitcoin and Ethereum is proof of work. Bitcoin's always going to be proof of work. So you've basically got these massive data centers with ever more powerful machines, basically doing the same calculation over and over as fast as it can in order to try to sort of get to the right answer the fastest and kind of win the lottery for proving the next block of transactions, right? So that's reliant on the most high-powered hardware that you could possibly build and then get into a data center ASAP. Ethereum, because it started, in 2015, has been proof of work so far. So also reliant on powerful machines, and although less powerful than Bitcoin kind of hardware requirements. And now ETH is moving to what we call a proof of stake consensus consensus class, right? And so what also happened in kind of the 2017-2018 era is there is a number of projects, including Solana, proving out that proof of stake is a way of building consensus in blockchains. And what it means is that you need much less sort of robust and therefore much more available hardware. You can basically do it with a pretty advanced CPU, meaning you can more or less use the types of servers that already exist in data centers around the world. And what it also means is that you don't have to, every 6 months throw out your hardware, which is what happens in Bitcoin, because it's a little bit of a hardware arms race. And it also means that proof of stake requires a good deal less energy to produce those machines on a recurring basis and also to run those machines. So proof of stake is where essentially all of the nodes, right, all of the machines or kind of folks that are participating in proving the transactions on the network. We call them nodes. We call them validators in proof of stake. They basically have holders of the sole token. Delegate tokens to that validator, and then the validators with more stake, depending on sort of, these things vary from network to network, but generally then they are the ones that can vote on transactions in the network, right? So it's sort of a little bit like putting your money where your mouth is. If I think Nick's a really great validator, I'll kind of trust him to make certain decisions, usually technical decisions, on my behalf in ensuring the health of the network.
All right, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the adoption since the launch. How many people are using Sol? How can we kind of tell what that looks like?
Yeah. So Solana has, if you look at various metrics out there, Solana oftentimes actually is at the top of the leaderboard in terms of active wallets. And Solana also has built its own kind of developer ecosystem, Rust based. Not to get too into it, but essentially these different ecosystems use different languages to build applications. And so Ethereum has something called Solidity, and which is their own language that they built in order to access the Ethereum virtual machine. And then Solana uses a pre-existing language called Rust, which is really popular throughout just the software world generally speaking, but it's pretty different from building in Solidity. So there's about 2,000 active developers who have built are building applications within Solana. So that's pretty great. And it's something we're quite proud of because I think that within blockchain, actually outside of the Solidity developer ecosystem, the only other one to really sort of build a developer ecosystem of scale is Solana. And having done that from scratch with entirely new tooling, new language, or at least a new language within the crypto world, that's something that we're really proud of.
Cool. So building a great ecosystem and tool set for developers is clearly a really important proof point for you guys. As the president of Solana Foundation, what are other sort of metrics that you guys are looking at to sort of demonstrate more adoption? Is it number of assets listed, active addresses? Like, what are the things that you're keeping an eye on a day to day?
Sure. Those are definitely global metrics that people look at to compare ecosystems for sure, right? Active wallets, new developers, active developers. But if I take a step back, the way I kind of think about building L1s is I think there's, call it a few different parts of the ecosystem that matter and also matter in succession. So the first one is actually building a network, right? And that's getting to mainnet. So Solana launched mainnet in 2020 because if there's no network, there's no blockchain, there's nothing to do, right? It just doesn't exist. So
Get it live.
there's quite a lot of work that goes into that, right? Actually writing the code, right? Making sure it works on the hardware and a little bit more of a hardware driven ecosystem like Solana. And that's a lot of it. That's like where the core innovation is, right? So for Solana, that took about, call it 2.5, 3 years to get mainnet working. Okay, so now you've got a network. Now that's really just the base layer infrastructure. If no one uses it, then it's also sort of not really that important. So okay, so who uses it? It's developers that are building upon this infrastructure and ideally thinking up and building new applications that people might care about, right? So in 2020, there was this big wave around decentralized finance that came into crypto, and that outside of trading was really the first application space where people were like, "Wow, this is a lot better potentially. Has its trade-offs and has its flaws, whatever, but this is." Better, right, in many ways than the existing financial system, or at least complementary in certain ways.
Yeah, and in some ways better in some ways than the kind of early crypto, I would say, infrastructure systems, which
Oh,
had
for
their own
sure.
problems around centralization, access, speed, et cetera.
Yeah,
So it's pretty
for
cool to watch.
sure. So once you've got a network, then you've got to attract developers to come and build new applications that are better than what we have in the existing world. So in DeFi, for example, then you had a bunch of people building, not just in Solana, but throughout crypto, things like lending markets. So now I can put up one Bitcoin as collateral, and then immediately I could borrow up to 80%, right? In let's call it in Ethereum or something like that. And that's pretty neat because where else can you get a loan like that with such flexible parameters in a couple of minutes? That's something you can really only do on DeFi. So once you've got a network, you've got to build a developer base to build these things, build these applications that people might care about. Otherwise, there's really no rationale for users to even care, right? So, in some ways, crypto is more difficult, right? It's more difficult than signing up for an email address, which is fairly easy these days because you've got to set up a wallet. These, addresses are not always human readable, and then you got to get used to the idea that if I lose my keys, it's like not just $100 slipping, dropping on the ground. It could be much more than that, right? So you got to get people used to that. So, what are the reasons that people are going to go through all of that onboarding? Well, it's because maybe now finance works much better, right? Now maybe payments works much better. Now maybe there's really cool things I can do on social that are better than what I can do today on the existing internet. But we need developers to actually think up and build all of those applications. Otherwise, users are like, I don't, not really worth sticking around. So I think generally in crypto, there's a number of networks that had network infrastructure that's been built and is live. We're by no means over with that, right? There's still a lot of innovation on that kind of network layer. And then as an ecosystem, I think really the developer layer, right? Inspiring, helping, developers, independent developers, think up cool reasons why they should be building on Web3 is really the focus. And once we sort of have a lot of innovation at that layer, then I think we'll have, collectively, as even as an industry, have a strong enough sort of value proposition to users of why you should be using applications built on this infrastructure rather than the stuff that you already know and love.
Yep. Okay. So get the infrastructure right, get it live, basically build a vibrant developer community, and then start putting products in the wild to make sure that they're usable, basically. So, okay, that makes sense. We had a question come in from the community. So liquidity, transaction fees, slippage are always three important factors in financial services. How does the Solana community work to solve the above problem and attract more users when innovations are likely to improve trading experiences in the future? This question comes from Kuku May via Twitter.
Hi, Kukume. Thank you for the question. So, I think this is one place where Solana actually really shines. And about in early 2021, there was a protocol called CRM launched on top of Solana, which allowed central limit order books, which is the primary way that markets trade and establish price, actually allowed central limit order books to be built natively entirely on chain on Solana. And the only reason why, or the reason why Solana could do that and Ethereum could not and other networks could not is because it was fast and cheap, right?
Yep. You need a lot of transactions per second to support something like that.
Right. Because if it's going to be entirely on chain, then every time you post a bid or post an ask, every one of those is technically a transaction. So if you're trying to do that on Ethereum, you literally can't, because how can you operate an order book where I've got to pay, first of all, pay at least $2 and wait a couple of minutes for you to say I'm willing to pay, 20K for Bitcoin. Not to mention like the number of transactions you need to do in order to actually maintain an order book. It's like got to be really instantaneous and fast, right? So, central limit order books, which is generally speaking the more efficient way of establishing price in a market, is something that could only really exist on chain on Solana. And all of the centralized exchanges, including blockchain.com, they run an order book system, but then they're running it on centralized servers. And so they can actually sort of really quickly process those transactions, right? So in terms of doing things natively in DeFi, in totally decentralized manner, I would say in terms of transaction fees, slippage, meaning sort of efficient pricing mechanisms, those are actually where Solana and the Serum protocol really shine. And then in terms of liquidity, I think that liquidity begets liquidity. Liquidity is king, as they always say. And so it's so then what are the reasons why you can sort to attract initial liquidity? I think what happened with Solana initially is that it was the only place you could do club or central limit order book trading on chain. So to the extent that people wanted to do DeFi native trading fully on chain, there's many reasons why people might want to do that. From it's novel and new, wow, we can finally do this, to it's better arbitrage opportunities and decentralized sort of wallet-based trading infrastructure has its advantages as well, so on and so forth. I think that is actually pretty. That's a place where Solana is really quite differentiated.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hopefully that answers Kuku's question. All right. So for Solana fans out there and everyone in the crypto community, what are some things in the roadmap that the foundation can share with us today that are maybe coming in the next 3 to 6 months that you're excited about? Any tidbits we wait eagerly?
Oh, totally. I think that there are a number of updates to the core protocol that the community has been eagerly anticipating and are being rolled out. So, Solana really had a breakout year in 2021. That is great in many ways, but then it also sometimes you can be a victim of your own success in the near term. So, with all of the activity that came onto Solana, sometimes it overwhelmed the network. Now, this is not unlike what happened to Ethereum in the early days, and you kind of have to build and engineer your way out of it. And those fixes are coming now. And so, some of those software fixes in order to basically prioritize transactions, those are being rolled out right now. And to prevent, if there's an empty project which is doing a mint over here, it's not going to overwhelm the network such that I'm trying to do my DeFi trade over here and I can't get it through, which obviously can be really frustrating. So there's a number of fixes there to basically cut down on folks that are trying to spam the network. And in a blockchain world, you can't really sort of do you got to like come up with some kind of cool engineering ways of solving that, because if you're not centralized, you can't just say, all right, I'm just gonna cut off their port, right? Like you can if you're AWS or something like that. So you don't really have those sort of like just lower the gates or like or pull up the bridge type of approaches in a decentralized network, unfortunately or fortunately. So there's some of those changes coming. That's on the technical level. I think there's also a number of cool things that are happening around the world. So with Solana, it was originally founded in the U.S., but it's global network, open source technology, and so we've been doing a lot of work to bring awareness to Solana around the world. We did a lot in India last year. And I think that particularly for a blockchain like Solana, which is fast and cheap, there are certain really basic things like payments that work really well on Solana. And those use cases, I think sometimes in crypto we forget about them a little bit because they seem so simple and mundane. And also, frankly, that the simple and mundane things have actually really not worked well in crypto at all up until now, right? There was the 2014 $1 billion transaction roadmap or blog post that was articulated for Bitcoin before Bitcoin sort of went from payments infrastructure to digital gold, and it's now fairly settled in that direction. But the thing that people use money for the most, right, which is to clear the other side of a transaction for goods or services.
Yep.
Bitcoin's bad at that. Ethereum's bad at that. And the only one that can do that right now is really Solana. And even a lot of the other chains that are live today, they're faster and cheaper, but they still might cost 50 cents, 25 cents a transaction. And that's not great. No one wants that.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like there's a lot coming up. So basically making the network more reliable, increasing capacity, maintaining censorship resistance, and then focusing on fundamentals so that more people can get on the network. So in a lot of ways, just like when you build a highway and you have a certain number of lanes, if a lot of people start traveling on it, it creates congestion. And that's true of blockchain technologies as well. So you'll hear a lot about scaling capabilities across different networks. And it's exciting to hear that you guys are concentrating on that. So if you're excited about what you heard today, please, you can head over to blockchain.com to buy, sell, swap, and hold Solana right within your blockchain.com wallet. I want to thank Lily for coming on the show today. Thank you so much for teaching us more about the Solana community, the roadmap, and what you guys are concentrating on. It sounds like this is definitely an era of building, and we're excited to hear more about all the things you guys put together for us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you.